Good, you just got here in time.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm really excited about our Immigration Spotlight this morning, and I'm so happy that you all have been able to join us. If more come, we'll keep an eye on the waiting room and we'll let some more in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We're pretty committed to having these sessions last an hour. And I am just really thrilled to be able to introduce to you all two people whom you probably most of you already know, Cecily Kern and Teresa Blumenstein. They have been very busy since they spent a year in our Loretto at the UN office as an intern working with me. I believe Cecily was first and then Teresa. They each did 2 years in the Loretto Volunteer Program, and their second year was with us in our UN office, and they have been up to lots since then. I asked them each, by way of my giving an introduction, I asked them each to give me a short blurb of what they've been up to since they left the Loretto Volunteer Program, and they've each been very busy. It's not so short, but I'm gonna just fill you in on what they've been doing. I'll start with Cecily. She was a volunteer from the years 2013 through 15. And her first year, she was in Washington, D.C. as an immigration paralegal with the Central American Resource Center. And in her second year with me and Rosa at the UN. And after her volunteer year, she worked with the Congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd, affectionately simply known as the Good Shepherds, in their UN office. And she was with them for 5 years. They had been so impressed with the work they saw her doing as the Loretto intern that they hired her. She focused heavily when she was with them on migration and gender equality issues. Since completing her master's in international affairs, at Columbia University's School for International and Public Affairs, she has begun a new role as the Global Policy and Research Advocate with Mercy International Association in their NGO office right down the hall from where our office is. They're still right there, right, Cecily? Oh, have they moved?
The office is moving to the 10th floor.
Oh, 10th floor, okay. Well, she has worked on a range of issues at the UN, from financing for development to the human right to water, to human trafficking, and more. She has dedicated significant time and energy to advocating for strong human rights-based and gender-responsive migration policies. Cecily has been an active member of the NGO Committee on Migration since she was a Loretto volunteer in the year 2014, and she currently serves as the committee's vice chair. Okay. That's Cecily. She's been busy. Now on to Teresa. Since finishing her year with Loretto at the UN, Teresa continued working in the community of Catholic religious NGOs at the UN. She served as an executive assistant for Unanima International, which is a coalition of many women's congregations, focusing her advocacy in the areas of mining, the human right to water, and migration. She also continued working closely with me to lead a planning effort that resulted in the launch of the Justice Coalition of Religious, or JCOR for short. And for the last 3 years, Teresa has been the coordinator of JCOR, which is a coalition of 19 of the religious NGOs at the UN, which aims to enhance the effectiveness of their advocacy by organizing opportunities and providing resources that support their capacity to speak and act collectively. Throughout her time at the UN, she has been a member of the NGO Committee on Migration as well, including 4 years acting as Secretary of the Executive Committee. In that role, she helped to launch and continues to convene the group's subcommittee dedicated to the issue of climate-induced displacement. Both have traveled internationally to attend various high-level conferences on migration, and we are fortunate to have them with us this morning and to continue to call them Lorettos. So that's the introduction. Before I turn it over to Cecily and Teresa, I have a very brief reading that I would like to share with you. It's called A Blessing. It's called Blessing for the Place Between. When you come to the place between, when you have left what you held most dear, when you are traveling toward the life you know not, when you arrive at the hardest ground, may it become for you a place to rest. May it become for you a place to dream. May the pain that has pressed itself into you give way to vision, to knowing. May the morning make of it an altar, a path, a place to begin again. Amen. Okay, Cecily, Teresa, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think maybe I will. Shall I spotlight them? Rosa, tell me. What do you think? Okay, I will spotlight the two of you and then you can take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Sally, for that really lovely introduction. And hi, everyone. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces. Let me get my screen sharing going. All right, hopefully you can see this. Okay, perfect. So with the time we have, we're going to share from our experience in international migration policy spaces at the United Nations, and more specifically on the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. And we're going to briefly discuss the role of the United States and then move on to some recommendations on how the Loretto LACC can engage in action and advocacy related to this process. And for the most part, we'll be referring to the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration as the Global Compact for Migration, or the GCM, or just the Global Compact. Teresa, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add to that, but okay.
Great, proceed.
Perfect. So the GCM is the first intergovernmentally negotiated agreement prepared at the UN to cover all dimensions of international migration in a holistic and comprehensive way. And we'll go over what's in the document, but of note to this group is that with the GCM, the international community for the first time makes specific commitments to not only address climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters as drivers of migration, but also to protect those who are compelled to leave their countries because of these events. And the GCM is a General Assembly resolution, so it's not a legally binding international treaty, which would require ratification from individual governments, but it is politically binding on all member states of the UN. Migration is one of the international community's most important, complex shared issues, and with multilateralism being the most obvious way to address it, it makes sense that it would be addressed here. But because it is so complicated, it took a while for it to actually come to the agenda of the UN. Because it's an inherently international issue, migration is something that individual governments can't address on their own. And at a time when multilateralism was and actually continues to be facing really strong headwinds, the Global Compact demonstrates the power of compromise, consensus, and collaboration, even on the most difficult global challenges. So before 2018, there had never been an internationally negotiated agreement that covers all dimensions of international migration in such a comprehensive way. And the development of the GCM largely arose from events that happened in 2015 with the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals and the large movements of refugees and migrants around the world, but especially the so-called refugee crisis in Europe. This led to the negotiation and adoption of the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants in 2016, which recognized the need for a more comprehensive approach to migration. And as a result, UN member states agreed to cooperate in the elaboration of 2 global compacts, one for migration and one for refugees.
So in addition to the very many specific objectives of the Global Compact, which we will get to in a moment, there were a set of kind of overarching concepts or ideas that were considered guiding principles for this agreement. And these are common to include in a UN document, and in some way, they're almost like something of an insurance policy and a touchstone to come back to throughout the process of negotiating, because documents can get very long and language can get very complicated, and it is helpful in those regards to have kind of policies to come back to that one can name again and again, saying we have to remember we have these boundaries to work within. We have to remember this principle. And I have divided them into 3 columns here, which is just kind of my own personal categorization for this set of principles. And I kind of think of the first set as the universal value principles. The middle set is kind of the political insurance principles. And the third column is the integrity principles, meaning they're kind of about how we stitch together many ideas and many actors to make the vision of the document possible. So under the universal value principles, the document was meant to be people-centered, meaning focused first and foremost always on migrants themselves in this case, always staying in compliance with human rights as understood and adopted in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that it should be gender responsive, meaning have an awareness of the way that issues affect different genders differently, and integrate that awareness into the approach. And child sensitivity, meaning there should be an attention to the way that these specific circumstances being addressed affect children differently, and that there ought to be special protections for children as they differ from protections for adults. And that, of course, comes to the basis that we have a convention that provides for specific additional rights that are available to all children under UN convention. And then with the political principles, these are more the principles that are put in place to make all of the governments feel comfortable when they come to the table. And so one is international cooperation, the idea that everyone is meant to participate, and so no one should be left to share the load or the burden of implementing alone. National sovereignty is the protection, so that for all governments who are feeling nervous about the idea of migration coming from an international space, encroaching on their own desires to have the final say in who crosses the border into their country. This principle offered them kind of a bit of comfort entering into these negotiations, which, as Cecily mentioned, is a bit of new territory for an international agreement. And then the focus on rule of law and due process is a little bit of the due process part is a protection on the migrant side, and the rule of law is there as a kind of a protection on the government side, kind of preserving the right, again, with national sovereignty to have final say and keep good order. And then in the integrity principles, we have sustainable development, which those who are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals will understand that phrase as an idea that integrates just about every aspect of society, economic, environmental, and social into a vision of what a sustainable society would look like. So this is the concept of sustainable development is very much about including all facets of society and life into this set of principles, into this document. And then the whole of government and whole of society approach means that this issue cannot be approached by any one small corner of our human society, but that it will really require the combined efforts, combined gifts, combined perspectives of anyone and everyone. And so we should consider the contributions and the needs of all potential actors in the creating of this document.
Okay, so there are 23 objectives in the Global Compact for Migration. We're going to go through all of them very briefly. They include number 1, collect and use accurate and disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies.
And the second, to minimize the adverse drivers and structural factors that compel migration, meaning anything that forces you to move as necessity rather than a free choice.
3 is to provide accurate, timely, accessible, and transparent information for governments, communities, and migrants at all stages of migration.
The 4th is to ensure that everyone has proof of legal identity and documentation, as is part of their right to have registration and record of their birth so that they have a nationality and proof of that nationality.
5 is to enhance availability and flexibility of pathways for regular migration. So these include pathways that facilitate labor mobility and decent work, reflecting demographics and labor market realities, optimizing education opportunities, upholding the right to family life, and responding to the needs of migrants in a situation of vulnerability.
Number 6 is to facilitate fair and ethical recruitment and decent work. So this one focuses primarily on movement for labor migration and economic opportunities, and ensuring that no one is being brought unfairly or under mislabeled, misconstrued circumstances into an international work situation.
7 is address and reduce vulnerabilities in migration, which may arise from circumstances in which the migrants travel or the conditions that they face in their countries of origin, transit, and destination, by assisting them and protecting their human rights.
Objective number 8 is to save lives and coordinate efforts to rescue or find migrants who have gone missing while in transit.
9 is strengthen international cooperation to prevent, investigate, prosecute, and penalize the smuggling of migrants.
Objective number 10 is to prevent, combat, and eradicate trafficking in persons.
11 is to manage borders in an integrated, secure, and coordinated manner.
Objective number 12, improving screening, assessment, and referral procedures, again, to be in line with all of those human rights principles, gender responsiveness, child sensitivity that we mentioned in the guiding principles.
13 is use immigration detention only as a measure of last resort and work towards alternatives to detention.
Objective number 14, enhance the protections and services that are available to migrants at the consulates for their nation in whatever their country of destination or transit might be.
15 is to ensure that all migrants, regardless of their migratory status, can exercise their human rights through safe access to basic services.
Objective number 16 is to promote more full inclusion and social cohesion among migrants and the communities in their country of destination or transit.
17 is to eliminate all forms of discrimination and promote evidence-based public discourse to shape a more realistic, humane, and constructive perception of migrants.
Objective number 18 is to enhance the capacity of migrants to really fully use their gifts and talents by creating more streamlined or clearer processes for migrants to develop their skills, to recognize the skills and qualifications that they already have coming in, but that may not register with the country of destination's accreditation or qualification process.
19 is to create conditions for migrants and diasporas to fully contribute to sustainable development in all countries.
Objective number 20 has to do with all those migrants who are sending funds back to communities or families in their country of origin. And the objective is to provide faster, safer, and cheaper transfers of remittances and ensure financial inclusion, meaning access to financial services in their countries of transit and destination.
21 is to cooperate in facilitating safe and dignified return and readmission of migrants, as well as sustainable reintegration into those countries of return.
Objective number 22 is that Social Security entitlements or benefits earned in one country should be portable, transferable, if a migrant then eventually returns to their country of origin, or if they've earned income and benefits in multiple countries, that they can still enjoy them wherever they might move to.
And last but not least, 23 is to strengthen international cooperation and global partnerships for safe, orderly, and regular migration. So as you can see, all 23 objectives really go over the entire cycle of migration, from pre-migration all the way through transit, destination, life in the country of destination, and then possibly also return. And I know that that was a lot in a short period of time, but we'll put a link in the chat to the NGO Committee on Migration's GCM at a Glance document and the full text of the Global Compact. So let me just do that really quickly before I forget. Okay. And now we will look more specifically at how the United States has engaged in this process. So in 2016, the US under the Obama administration played a relatively constructive role in the development of the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants. There are a couple exceptions to that, which we don't really have time to get into right now, but you may be able to take an educated guess as to what those issues might have been. And President Obama also hosted a leaders summit on the global refugee crisis on the margins of the opening of the General Assembly in September 2016 to increase funding to humanitarian crises, to admit more refugees through resettlement, and to increase refugees' self-reliance and inclusion.
And then, due to events we're familiar with toward the end of 2016, the United States kind of transitioned from a mostly helpful role in the migration discussion at the UN to a mostly silent or absent role in the migration conversation. And kind of the major public turning point that led to that transition was when the Trump administration withdrew from the overall process to develop the Global Compact in December 2017, citing, of course, the usual reason that the United States might not participate or sign on to a UN document is sovereign interests, meaning not really being willing to admit being at all at the disposal of the international community, but wanting to just kind of stand on its own and answer to no one. And so after that withdrawal, we saw the United States was essentially absent throughout each phase of the process of the Global Compact, which included the thematic discussions that happened in the year between the adoption of the New York Declaration and actual starting of negotiations for the Global Compact for migration, and also absent in the stock-taking moment. That was really a short process that happened between thematic discussions and actual document negotiations. The United States was not present, and you can see in the photos on the right there, those are actually both from stock-taking meeting, which was kind of intended to be a moment for the international community after having taken a year to have intense discussions on various aspects of migration. Stock-taking process was meant to be a moment to come together again and ask essentially each government what is your position now after we've taken time to really hear each other on all these issues? Where is your position going into these negotiations? And so as you can see, the United States seat at that meeting was vacant. And so Cecily and I and our colleague Katie were happy to slip in there and fill the chair for them. Of course, only in jest, only that we could speak for them, but unfortunately that would not have gone over well. But we were happy to be there even for a moment, and we're listening to the process throughout. And so getting back to the US process, so after being absent from the stock taking meeting, they were then also absent for the almost 7 months of negotiations that took place in the first half of 2018. And ultimately, when it came time for the adoption of the document, there was a conference in Marrakesh, Morocco in December 2018 that was attended by most nations of the world, but the United States was one of about 30 that were not present at the adoption conference. And ultimately, the document was to be officially adopted via a resolution of the General Assembly. So it had to come back to New York for its final official vote tally. And so when that vote happened, the United States was actually one of only 5 nations that actively voted against the adoption of this compact. There were several more that abstained, but overall, it was largely supported almost across the globe. And after its adoption, the United States was still absent at last November when the world was coming together to begin doing regional reviews, saying what progress have we made since we adopted this document in 2018. And so there was a regional review that was meant for Europe and North America happening in November, and the US was again not present for that process. And just because, of course, there's always a curiosity when we say the US was one of 5 countries who voted against the adoption of the compact. So here is a photo of the actual tally on the day of that vote. And you can see that in voting against it, the United States was in the company of the Czech Republic, Hungary, Israel, Poland, those 4, and then the United States. And for those who are a little bit more visual, this is how the vote looked map-wise. So as you can see, we're overwhelmingly blue voting in favor of adoption, very small number voting against, and then a few more abstaining.
So since January of this year, the US position on international migration has changed again, and they've really begun to re-engage in these multilateral spaces and reestablish their relationships with international organizations. And in various international meetings, like the Global Forum on Migration and Development, which happened in January, the Asia Pacific Regional Review of the Global Compact for Migration, which happened in March, and the quarterly briefing of the UN Migration Network, which also happened in March, just a couple of weeks ago, the US has stated that it's closely reviewing its position towards the GCM. And in the statement that the US delegate to the regional review in Asia Pacific said, our intent is to support the Global Compact on Migration, its implementation in close coordination with the international community. And I can also put the link to that statement, the full statement, in the chat eventually. So now, this is where we all come in as migration advocates. We're glossing over a huge part of this, which is the implementation itself. We can talk about that more. But right now we're going to talk about the follow-up and review, which is something that we can work on leading up to this new conference. So we as civil society have a really important role to play as service providers in implementing the various policy actions that are outlined in the Global Compact, but we can also get involved in the follow-up and review of this process. And the main global platform to discuss and share progress on the implementation of the Global Compact is the International Migration Review Forum. This is a new meeting that is scheduled to happen at UN headquarters in New York every 4 years, beginning in 2022. We don't have specific dates for the meeting yet, but we're guessing that it will happen in May of next year. So we have some time to prepare. As Teresa mentioned, there are also regional reviews, which began last year and which will also happen every 4 years. So they're supposed to alternate. It was supposed to start in 2020, and then the global review in 2022, and then in 2024, there will be another set of regional reviews, et cetera, et cetera. So the IMRF, we use lots of acronyms around here, but the IMRF will include 4 interactive multi-stakeholder roundtables, which will cover they're supposed to cover all 23 objectives of the Global Compact. And governments will also be invited to make voluntary reports to review their implementation of the GCM in the policy debate and plenary. But it's also important that we as stakeholders make use of this opportunity, that we take advantage of this space for Loretto, for all of us to really share the experiences of migrants and communities and contribute to discussion of the progress, challenges, emerging trends, and recommendations regarding migration in the Central American, North American corridor and globally.
So we have prepared a few initial thoughts for you all, knowing that you've set up these wonderful spotlights with a basic structure of wanting to come together, inform yourselves, and walk away with some type of idea or plan for action in response. And we love that, and that's our picking up on that sense of actionable information from Loretto certainly is still with us in the work that we're doing now. So we wanted to be sure that we were offering a few thoughts on how you all might engage with this process, as though the UN may often seem kind of far away or removed from the work that you are doing and the situations that you're monitoring, but you have a very important role to play. And so our first thoughts on how you might get involved in this whole process, acronyms and objectives and regional reviews, is first with an activity that's very familiar to you all, which is to be in contact with your own representatives in the US government. And you can do that at many levels and by many different modes of communication. But essentially, here are a couple recommendations that might be useful to put forward to those representatives. First, we want them to be participating in a big way in the International Migration Review Forum. In some sense, this could really be a big kind of coming out again moment for the United States, reemerging onto the global stage in a powerful way as a one-time leader in the migration conversation, and saying, here we are again, and we intend to be constructive participants in this process, in this conversation, as we want to be constructive participants in building global society. And so specifics that we might ask for in terms of their participation in the IMRF would be, one, to prepare a very comprehensive report that they would submit this coming year, 2022, and also that they put in writing some type of plan, a concrete plan, to continue preparing a comprehensive national report every 4 years of this process, so that it is kind of built in and not something that will just disappear with the next swing of the political pendulum in this country. Another thing that we would ask for in that report is that it include an analysis of all 23 objectives of the Global Compact, not turn into cherry picking where they feel they have the most positive things to say and kind of ignore the others. And also, to this point, that they include not only national strengths and the progress that's being made, but that they also are willing to take on a leadership on the global stage in acknowledging and analyzing their weaknesses, their challenges, and bringing forth requests for guidance or support where they need it from the international community. We do not see enough of this from any government in UN spaces, I would say. And so this would really be an opportunity, honestly, for the United States to show some genuine and in some ways unprecedented leadership in this conversation. So it could really be a great political move for the United States in its own self-interest, as well as being good and healthy for the process and encouraging other governments to come forward in an honest way to reflect on the areas where they're finding it difficult to make progress. And then the second big call that we might want to make to the US government is to establish and conduct an open consultation process that would bring together members of civil society like ourselves to offer our viewpoints and recommendations that could also be included in the official national report that they are submitting to the IMRF. So essentially, we're also saying to them, we want our voices included, and we're happy to offer you our observations and our content to submit. So, we're happy to take some of the load in creating this report if you'll just give us a chance to have our voices included.
So there will be an opportunity for us as organizations accredited to the UN to submit written reports to the International Migration Review Forum. And we don't know what the exact format of these reports will be yet, but here are a few kind of general content categories that are useful in civil society reporting to many different UN processes. The first is sharing experiences of reality on the ground. So draw from both the positive and negative aspects of testimonies of migrants themselves and your own experiences monitoring and reporting on the effects of US immigration policy and the situation at the US-Mexico border. The second is to share good practices that you have employed or encountered to respond to the challenges of migration. And last but not least, to provide recommendations or calls for support to government and the long list of other actors and stakeholders that are also engaged in international migration. And in terms of creating the report itself, here are some steps to consider. The first is to reflect on the aspects of migration policy that you have the most background knowledge and experience in. What is your kind of unique perspective? What can you bring to the table that no one else can? Then the second step is to identify within the text of the document that you're reporting on, in this case, the Global Compact for Migration, identify the pieces of that document that are related to the aspects of migration that you're most familiar with. The third is to reflect on those GCM objectives one by one, and we'll have reflection questions in a minute, and integrate them with other people's reflections and put them in writing. And the last step is to send it to your UN office, to Beth. Probably, we don't have a deadline, but it will probably be late this year or early next year.
And so here are the kind of guiding questions that might be useful that Cecily mentioned on the previous slide. And we've organized them here into two categories because the first set work for both you all and also for migrants themselves. So if you have an opportunity at some point to pose questions to some of the migrants that you've worked with, this first set might also be relevant and pertinent to get their voices involved in this reporting process. And so essentially, you might work your way through this set of questions for each of the objectives that seem to be an area of strength or expertise for you. So when looking at the objectives, how and where have I witnessed government programs or policy fulfilling this commitment? Where do I see that my government's programs are lacking in this commitment area? And what additional concerns or recommendations do I have that are not being addressed by any of the commitments of the Global Compact? Because comprehensive, quote unquote, though it is, there are still some areas, some holes in between. And most of those, there's a reason why that happened in the end due to negotiations. But it doesn't mean that we can't continue bringing those holes up throughout the process. It is, in fact, our role to continue shining light on kind of the gaps between commitments that are not highlighted explicitly in the text. And then our second set of questions, again, truly for anyone who's working to support the rights of migrants. We can ask ourselves, which of these commitments am I or my organization helping to fulfill through our work, and what lessons from enacting the services or the programs that we offer might be valuable to share with government and UN leaders. So this is kind of a question about bringing forth your own good practices that you have found to be effective in meeting the needs of migrants and supporting their agency. You can also ask what support from government, and that might be material resources, information, or changes in policy would allow you to better serve migrants in some way. And finally, what support from governments, again, material, information, or policy would actually reduce the need for your work. Because in most of our cases, unlike say being in the private sector, our overall objective is not to keep up demand for the work that we do, but actually to decrease it to nothing and move on to something else with our lives. Wouldn't that be lovely? So the final question is, a way of thinking about this is, how could government kind of take on more of the responsibility so that we're not filling in the gaps where government should really be picking up the response to needs.
All right, so thanks so much for listening. We really glossed over some of the really juicy details of the negotiations and what made it, what didn't, what were the areas of contention. We glossed over implementation of the compact, basically with the limited time we had. I hope that you're able to learn a little something, and we're happy to have a discussion or answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. How do we?
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so very much. Wow, that's a lot. You covered a whole lot in a short amount of time. I appreciate it. And before I open it up for general questions or comments, I really would like to give Beth an opportunity to respond in whatever way would be appropriate for her, since she's our UN representative. And I don't know, I'm thinking LACC members are kind of excited about the possibility of us participating in this process, but of course it would have to be in conjunction with and pretty much under the direction of Beth. So Beth, what do you have to say to what we've heard?
Well, thanks, Sally, for the opportunity to chat with folks, and deep thanks to you, Cecily, and you, Teresa, for being with us this morning and being willing to take your time on what I hope is a rather pleasant weekend in New York City. And you just gave an amazing overview of an incredibly complex topic in like less than 40 minutes. I am so impressed. And I'd like to thank you both. I don't know if people in the Loretto community would recognize or realize this, but these two young women have been at the core of the work of the Committee on Migration for the past 6, 7, 8 years, as long as they've been around. That committee is one of many different committees, all run by those of us working in civil society. And that's how we get things done at the UN. It's an incredible moral voice. It helps keep governments in check. It lets them know that civil society is watching. And we have an informal group at the UN, run Religious at the UN, which helps support things like this and also helps support what you heard Sally mention at the very beginning, Justice Coalition of Religious, which both Sally and Teresa were instrumental in getting off the ground, which should be the topic for another Loretto meeting for another day for sure. But I would also encourage LACC, please take all of the steps that Cecily and Teresa outlined, because I'm a one-person office right now. And with Annie, the help of Annie Rosenkrantz, we are doing our best to get ourselves a Loretto volunteer for next year. But it's a challenging time. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. The position would now need to be based in Denver, not New York, because our program has shifted. So not sure what'll happen with that, but I would appreciate any and all assistance that LACC would like to take, and will do my best from the office, which hopefully I will be back in, maybe even this summer, certainly by fall, to make sure that our feedback could go into these regional updates. So happy to work with the LACC on this. Deeply grateful that I get to see and work with Teresa and Cecily both on a fairly regular basis, although this year it's certainly been seeing each other's faces in little boxes. So I really can't wait to see you both in person again. And yeah, I think that's all I would want to add at this point, and deep gratitude to LACC for all the work that you do, and also to Rosa Lizarde, who's another great link with the work that goes on at the UN, and with her work with the Feminist Task Force, which also does incredible work in several different arenas as we all work together to try and achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much.
Can I start out, Sally, with a question that might be of interest to others? And if it is, great.
Okay.
If not,
Before you do,
curious.
if you don't mind, before you do, there's one other person on our call with us that I'd like to acknowledge and give her a chance to say a few words, and that
Please
would
do.
be Mary Jo Toll, who worked with me for many years at the UN and was heavily involved with the NGO Committee on Migration, actually served as its chair for several years. And Mary Jo, I'm so glad you were able to join us this morning. And would you like to unmute yourself and say a few words? There.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. This is fantastic. I just found out about 10 minutes before this started. I'm at a retreat center because my sister that lives with me made a mistake. She saw one of the other provinces invite their people in, and she thought we were invited in. And so here we are. It's great. And anyways, I'm just so excited because Loretto has always been fantastically responsive. And I wouldn't expect anything less from Cecily and Teresa. You're fantastic also. And Beth, I'm happy to meet you finally, to know who you are, because I see a lot of good work. And I'm on the ground now, and what a change, what a sea change. Just in the area of public charge, I'm taking a course now on the family law system. That's the system that we have in the United States for immigration, because I'm trying to support my 6 people who are going to be interns in the En Camino process of helping immigrants. The DOJ recognized En Camino, and also to get accredited. And the technology is news to me, but anyway, it's fantastic. But the whole part on public charge, for example, had to be rewritten in the book written by Charles Wheeler, which he's using for the course. And that's wonderful. So much is happening. Also, I think we need to get somehow your NGO representative at the UN, find out who she is, get her connected with Kamala, and have a tripart working group, because you know so much. Now, I have to say that Biden is really getting up to speed fast. That's amazing to me. And since he's already said he's willing to do 8 years, I think this is great. So I could go on and on and on, but I know you have other things to cover. Thank you so much for letting me know, Sally. This is wonderful.
Thanks, Mary Jo. Thanks for joining us. Sorry about the
Do
short
stay
notice,
in
but
touch, by the way, the two Evas, so.
absolutely. Okay, okay. And so Mary Jo returned to her home in Ohio after 8, 9, 10 years, a long time in New York, and immediately picked up where she left off and doing on the ground work, supporting migrants trying to apply for asylum and so on. So thanks, Mary Jo, for your work. And now, Beth, tell us about your question or comment, okay? To start us off.
Well, because Loretto is a community of great diversity and we greatly value diversity in its many forms, I was just hoping, Teresa and Cecily, you all might be just willing to mention the 2 or 3 top sticky wickets, the places where there was lots of contention and where things might have gone just a little bit better, just so people have a sense of some of the drama and debate that happened during this time period, which I know was intense.
Sure. So there were a few different areas of concern during the negotiations. There was some pretty significant tension between the rights of governments, the sovereign rights of governments to manage migration versus the commitment to multilateral cooperation. The United States, as mentioned previously, was one of those it's our sovereign right to determine who can enter our borders and in what way they can acquire citizenship, blah, 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 blah. Those types of things. The issues of borders, detention, return, and access to services were some of those issues. There was also tension in terms of the differentiation between regular and irregular migrants. So another way to say that might be documented or undocumented, but there are lots of complication, like lots of different ways that someone can be regular or irregular in migration. So no strong language could be achieved on non-criminalization of migrants and those who provide support to them, or on firewalls, which is basically a barrier between migrants' access to services and reporting to immigration authorities, on regularization, on access to basic services, on full labor rights, on freedom of association for irregular or temporary migrant workers. There was a lot of tension in that. There was also a similar issue of differentiation between refugees and migrants, particularly migrants in vulnerable situations, and on the issue of non-refoulement, which is a principle that is in the Refugee Convention from 1951 and 1967, but that does not only apply to refugees, which is a principle that says you cannot return a person to their country of origin if they will experience harm in their country of origin. So that is a principle, that's a protection that is recognized for refugees, but also for other people, not just refugees. It's in the Convention on, I think it's in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's definitely in the Torture Convention. It's in a few different places, so it's not just for refugees. Another issue, which was briefly mentioned, is that the Global Compact is not legally binding. So there were a few people who said, we want this to be a stronger legally binding document, but also, as I mentioned before, one of the issues of having an international treaty that is legally binding is then you need to get individual governments to sign on and ratify those documents. So there was a discussion, do we have a non-legally binding document that's politically binding for all governments, or do we have a legally binding document that only a few will actually sign on to? And we know that this is a problem because there is a convention on the rights of migrant workers and their families, which is one of the more poorly ratified human rights conventions at the UN. the GCM also doesn't have specific targets for member states to achieve anything by a certain date. That makes it difficult to review things. Also, reviewing 23 objectives 4 years after the document was adopted, that's, I don't know, it's concerning to us. How can you have a substantive review on so many things with so many countries for so much time? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. And I think the last thing that I'll mention is that there isn't really a clear implementation strategy. It's just kind of up to governments to work on it on their own. There is a new UN migration network, which is an interagency group of UN offices that all have some mandate related to migration, and they are working on coordinating with member states and creating national strategy and implementation plans, and working on funding to build capacity for member states to implement the agreement. But it's still pretty loose. So those are kind of the issues that came up in the negotiations that I would mention. I've rambled on for a long time. I don't know, Teresa, if you have any others.
It was fabulous. You all just got a synthesis of at least 120 hours of negotiations right there. And Cecily was there for every hour of them.
And taking notes.
I would only add that there was also some contention over the concept we mentioned in our initial introduction of acknowledgement of climate change and environmental disaster as a driver of migration. It was kind of a funny room to be in. We were hearing, clear testimony that really leaves no room for doubt whatsoever, that of course environmental factors force people to move. And in the same room, hearing people saying, well, that it's minimal, if anything. So we don't really need to devote too much time or policy or measures for protection of that population. It's minimal. So I mean, it's one of those interesting standoffs where everyone in the room knows what's real. They each have their private policy positions that they are allowed to bring forward. And so it's something of a standoff, a stalemate in terms of language. That resulted in what I would say is still a very clear acknowledgement of the reality of climate displacement in the final document. However, it kind of got its own special subset of paragraph that was slightly less of a commitment than the other areas and more just an illumination of the reality that we're not yet ready to commit to respond to. And that kind of how they cleverly worked that out, kind of taking a half step forward instead of no steps forward. Toward being able to really respond to that reality globally. So that's the only thing that I would add to Cecily's wonderful list of the points of contention.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I note that we are right up on the hour, but I see one raised hand, and many of us haven't had a chance to have our questions addressed. If I don't know, we advertise this as a 1 hour. Cecily and Teresa, I don't want to take advantage, but would you have another 5 or 10 minutes if people would like to stay and further this discussion? Okay. While I have the floor, I'll just make a comment and say that I was so happy that you went through each of the 23, I think it was, sections or components of this compact. I really am astounded at how far this issue has come since I left the UN. I mean, I was just rejoicing with each and every one of those that you say is addressed. What a great record of achievement and moving the issue forward. And I'm sure that the two of you were quite instrumental in that. So congratulations. Now, Martha Alderson has a raised hand. Yes, no? Oh, I see that on your screen. Okay. Who else would like to jump in here and have a comment or question? Rosa? Then Mary Jean.
Sure, just very quickly, because I know we're talking, just big congratulations to you two. What a thorough presentation. And I think that bringing it to the LACC is so vital. And Beth, thank you for your words. I think that the LACC, we can really provide a lot of input into this parallel report, just in terms of the realities on the ground. I mean, after so many years of doing the border trips, and most recently, the updates that we have and have been documented on this immigration spotlight series of detainees. So I think the testimonies of the migrants, the experiences that we have participated in and brought in others for monitoring and looking the effects of U.S. Policy. I mean, I think all of that is something that we can really develop, but of course we would need to partner with people such as yourselves and other organizations, and with our UN NGO liaison, Beth. But I think that there's so much potential there to really, move the needle on this issue at the global level. Certainly there are groups that are going to be doing it at the national level, but to work with this new administration in basically this new global process and reporting mechanism, I think offers a lot of potential. So it gives us a lot of food for thought, gives us really the opportunity to really spotlight this issue within our UN work as well. So kudos to both of you. And Beth, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Rosa. Mary Jean.
Well, congratulations to everybody. But let me tell you, I feel so much pain, and I am so grateful to hear the 23 things that you put out. But the reality on the ground is pathetic. I mean, we have 5,000 girls coming to San Diego, young girls between 12 and 17. We have 1,700 migrants at the Mexico border, many from Honduras with the hurricanes, and all the things you said. These migrants come, they don't have papers. They don't have any of that. And there are podcasts down here in San Diego of interviews with migrants. We have been waiting 2-3 years because of our other. I want Cecily and Teresa to come. You can stay at my house. Let's get Beth down here. Why not? Or is she the UN person? We need to get people here. Okay, our government, FEMA, finally stepped in. We have our what do you call it, Sally? You have the same thing.
The convention center.
Yeah, the convention center has been turned, and I almost vomited when I saw the newspaper, because here's all these representatives, praising how they set it up. Well, they sure, I don't know. The reality, and I agree with you all, or whoever said, we've got a opportunity now, and somehow, even with the pandemic, I have 2 shots. I'm very happy if any of you want to come, and Beth too. If it would help make the plight of migrants stronger, I would love it. So I don't know. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Jean. Thanks, Mary Jean. Anyone else? Mary Jo. Oh, no, now you just muted yourself. You were unmuted before.
Okay. That
Good.
okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to mention something. I don't know if you saw it, any of you, but the LCWR under Ann Schultz, they're just fantastic, that group. And they're sending people down, Mary Jean. They're sending people down. I think I'm not sure that they're going to San Diego. Maybe you need to holler a little louder, but they, this whole thing is just a reaction from what happened under the previous administration, of course. However, there was a panel of 4 that spoke on children at risk. Did anybody see that? And it was excellent. I have a copy of it. And if you send me your email, I'll just send it back to you. But it really outlines what's going on. Of course, the people who don't want this administration to look good are going to make them look as bad as you can. But it is very dangerous right now. And it's problematic. But the first thing that he had to address were the people that were in Mexico because they weren't allowed in the United States and they have papers. And then he has to go to the next. And I think getting Kamala ahead of it, I think is good because the man can't do everything. But I just wanted to say that children at risk, it's really very good to explain what's going on. People have a hard time figuring it out because they hear this and this and this and this,
Mary Jo, send it to me and I'll send it around, okay?
That's great. Perfect. Okay, thank you. I will.
Okay. Mary Ann.
I came in late, but on what we can do, those of us in the Midwest who know the stories, know migrants here who don't have documentation and are afraid, but we don't really have the kind of data that you both were saying we would need to write statements, but we could certainly sign statements, or we could certainly take the outline and add a little bit that we knew. So I would just say, think about including those of us who are at a distance. How do we get to put our voice in as well? For instance, we have a representative to Congress now, Cori Bush, who is a ball of fire, but migration isn't her issue. But those of us who live in St. Louis could press a little bit on that, and she would, once inspired, move on forward. But we need really some direction. Your qualifications for making statements, I don't have, but I would sign on to do something.
Wonderful, thank you, thank you. And to follow up on that, I had a question. When you said what could Loretto do, the advocacy with representatives, I think was your first item, about getting serious about adopting the implementation. Were you saying we should be advocating with our elected representatives, or isn't this going to come out of the State Department like they normally do?
Both.
That's my question to Cecily and Teresa.
Teresa, did you want to take that, or I can?
Sure. So first, just for clarity, there wouldn't be any kind of formal adoption or opportunity for the U.S. to sign on the compact. As it was adopted by the General Assembly, that means it officially applies to every country, period. It doesn't matter if you voted in favor or against it. Because the majority voted in favor, it was handily approved. So now it is adopted, and it now applies to all member states of the United Nations. So there won't be sort of a formal moment of adoption that we would be looking for, so much as for the US to become an active participant in this process that already exists. And in terms of who to direct that request to, I heard from somewhere in the crowd, both. I think the way that our government is set up, it is meant to travel, word is meant to travel through your elected representatives kind of up the chain to the White House administration, which would include the State Department. And so I think that basically any representative or office for whom you have contact information is a viable recipient for a call for participation. But of course, yes, the faces, participation would be coming from somewhere in the State Department and the US mission, UN.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. And if I could just add on the point of reporting, Mary Jean, what you shared, and Marianne, what you mentioned about, we have experiences, we work with migrants, we know what's going on in our communities. Don't discount that, because the UN governments can take care of big data, statistics, all of that stuff. We are not expected to come with all of this quantitative data at the UN. Our role is to bring the voices of affected communities from the grassroots to these international spaces like the UN. And so having the stories of what is happening in San Diego or St. Louis or wherever you are is so valuable. And it's not something that the US government would include in its report or that the UN would include in its report. It's something that we can uniquely bring into that space. And so in I don't know how to prepare this fancy report. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to express the realities of what you're experiencing. And there will be limitations of word count and stuff like that, but don't worry about that. I would really strongly encourage you to pull something together to submit, because otherwise those experiences and those voices will not be heard at the UN.
And I'll also add to that, that being distant from the border need not mean that you don't have access to valuable testimony as well. St. Louis in particular, Marianne, I'm thinking of the great, there's strong diaspora communities there. Certainly there was a good bit of refugee resettlement that happened there. And many of the objectives of the Global Compact apply to, more established migrants and their ongoing relationships with their country of origin and their ability to, say, for example, send funds to family or friends, country of origin, or retain benefits, those sorts of things. So I know, even if it's not immediately newly arrived migrants that are in your community, this compact really stretches far beyond that kind of time frame and that geographic area.
Okay, I think that we need to bring it to a close. God, I am so grateful to you, Teresa and Cecily. And on a personal note, I'm really kind of proud of the two of you, and that you continue to be there in the game, doing this really hard on your heart, hard work. And I, for one, continue to view the two of you as continuing to represent Loretto, even though I know you're representing Mercy's and you're representing J-Corps. As far as I'm concerned, you're representing Loretto. And I am just so grateful and will always be so. Now, I'd like to end by showing you my t-shirt. Can you see that?
Where you can't see.
Very nice.
Yep.
Emma Lazarus.
Can you see
Statue
it?
of Liberty.
Where are you?
Okay. Thank you all. And I hope that Teresa and Cecily, you'd be willing to do this with us again.
Yes,
Sure.
look forward to coming back. And I can't let you go without saying quickly too, I should acknowledge that the reason I met Sally and the reason that I had a focus on migration when I came to the UN is because I did the border trip with you all in my year between my Loretto years. So you're responsible for everything that came after.
LACC, there you go. Okay. Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
Loretto's.
Awesome.
Our paths shall cross again, I know.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you all for
Bye.
joining.
Thanks, Sally. And thanks, Teresa and Cecily. What a wonderful day.
I'm going to stop recording.
Thanks to all of you. It's really wonderful. Is this something that you do on a regular basis, or is this a one-off right now?